Penguin Random House Audio presents The Correspondents, 6 Women Writers on the Front Lines of World War II, by Judith Mackrell. Read for you by Teal. Introduction. When Virginia Cowles flew into Berlin on the 31st of August 1939, she knew that this assignment could be one of the most hazardous of her career. Gleaming black enfilades of Nazi fighter planes were parked along the runways of Tempelhof Airport. The Berlin skyline was spiked with anti-aircraft guns, and the city centre looked, to her, like an armed camp, its streets clogged with military trucks, its hotel lobbies jostling with Nazi stormtroopers. Europe was now so close to war that every British journalist had been recalled home, and staff at the British Embassy had been ordered to pack. Even the weather felt ominously on edge. A dry, dusty wind blew through the city, which, to Virginia's ears, had the queer sound of a death rattle as it caught up bits of paper and rubbish and sent them scraping along the pavement. Yet Virginia, an American correspondent for the Sunday Times, was determined to remain in the city long enough to scoop what would probably be her paper's final report before Germany became enemy territory. Ambitious, inquisitive, willful, and not a little ruthless, she'd always had faith in her ability to survive. It was stubborn self-belief that had lifted her first out of the ghetto of New York society columns and had subsequently taken her to Italy to interview Mussolini on the launch of his invasion of Abyssinia, and then to Spain, where she became one of a tiny minority to cover the civil war from both sides. Yet, if Virginia appeared fearless in the advancement of her career, the most powerful weapon in her armory was charm. Wide-eyed and slenderly built, disconcertingly glamorous in lipstick and high heels, she could walk into a military mess or a politician's office and coax the toughest, most recalcitrant of men to talk. Her job in Berlin was to analyse the mood of the German public, and the following morning, when Virginia awoke to the news that Adolf Hitler had sent his troops into Poland, she expected to find the city in a state of high agitation. The invasion was in clear violation of the peace agreement which Hitler had signed with Britain and France the previous year, and it was a deliberate provocation to war. Most of the ordinary Berliners to whom Virginia spoke that day, however, seemed unaware of the crisis they faced. The reception clerk at her hotel had been incredulous when she suggested that his country might soon be in conflict with half of Europe. "Poland is Germany's affair," he'd protested. "What's it got to do with anyone else?" But Dr. Böhmer, the chief of foreign press in Berlin, had burst into tears when he'd heard the morning's news. "Nothing can save the situation now," he'd lamented. "The whole world will soon be involved." As one of the saner Nazis in power, Böhmer understood the catastrophe that Hitler was courting. And Virginia, too, had to acknowledge that her own situation was now precarious. It might be only a matter of hours before Britain and its allies responded to the gauntlet Hitler had thrown down, and once they did, it might take her weeks, even months, to find her way home. In fact, she was safely back in London in time to file her report for the next day's paper. But while she'd escaped Berlin, the war was to become the story of Virginia's career, and she would face far greater dangers in covering it. She would report on the Russian invasion of Finland, the blitzing of London, the occupation of France, and she would get deeper into the desert war in Tunisia than any other correspondent. At first, newspaper editors would try to make Virginia a part of the stories she filed, an attractive young woman who was willing to brave bullets and bombs, a former society girl who could muck in with the men in trenches. Female correspondence was still a novelty when the war started in 1939. Yet, despite the fuss and publicity that was made of Virginia and a few other women like her, a very small but determined contingent of women had actually been reporting from the world's battle zones for close to 100 years. Jane Cazeneuve may have been the first, reporting on the Mexican-American War in 1846, but 2 years later she was followed by Margaret Fuller, hired by the New York Tribune to cover the Italian uprisings against Austria. In 1897, the war between Turkey and Greece was covered by Cora Taylor Crane for the New York Journal, and in 1899, Lady Mary Howard reported on the South African War for the Daily Telegraph. By 1914, when editors across Europe and America had become alerted to the size and profitability of their female readership, many were keen to report World War I from a woman's angle. And while those who were assigned to the battlefields were meant to be limiting their reports to nurses and hospitals, a doughty few did manage to send back dispatches from the front. It was the Second World War, though, which was to become the defining opportunity for female correspondents. As the battle lines spread, and the story grew to encompass both civilians and soldiers, editors had to increase their global coverage, and by the end of the war, around 250 of the reporters and photographers accredited to the Allied armies were women. Footnote: the majority were North American, while those from Britain and the Commonwealth included 16 Australians, accredited in 1942. End of footnote. Prominent among them was Claire Hollingworth. Although she'd been a virtual novice when she talked her way into a stringer's contract with the Daily Telegraph, she was armed with a self-belief that was even more foolhardy than Virginia's. Having been sent to Katowice in southwest Poland, the first assignment she set herself was to borrow a car from the British consulate and drive into Germany to go scouting for troop activity. It was the 29th of August 1939, and the escapade was madness. Claire could have been apprehended as a spy, even shot by jumpy guards. But she was very ambitious to prove her reporter credentials, and her initiative would be rewarded with an astonishingly lucky scoop. Driving close to the border, she found herself on a road that was lined with broad Hessian screens, and when a gust of wind blew one of them aside, she was able to see straight down to the valley below, where 9 panzer divisions were massed in battle-ready formation. It was clear evidence of an invasion force, and the story Claire phoned through from Katowice was splashed over the Telegraph's front page the following morning. In London, there was still hope that war could be averted. But on the 1st of September, Claire was awoken at dawn by the heavy crump of anti-aircraft fire, and she had a clear sight of warplanes circling in the distance. The attack on Poland had surely begun, and as she phoned in the second headline story of her new career, the adrenaline pumping through Claire's veins was not so much fear as the certainty that she'd found her life's vocation. One of the bravest of all women correspondents, Sigrid Schultz, would not report from an active battle zone until January 1945. Yet she'd been covering her own personally fraught front line since 1933. As Berlin bureau chief for the Chicago Tribune, Sigrid had made herself a heroically persistent opponent of the Nazi regime. Tiny, combative, with a fluent grasp of 5 languages and the best sources in Berlin, she had withstood surveillance, interrogation, and death threats in order to publish the truth of Germany's descent into a criminal, fascist state. William Shearer, who reported from Berlin for CBS Radio, would credit Sigrid as the bravest and best informed of the Foreign Press Corps. On the 1st of September 1939, he noted in his diary that it was she who alerted him to the invasion of Poland. At 6 a.m., Sigrid Schultz, bless her heart, phoned. She said, "It's happened." I was very sleepy, my body and mind numbed, paralyzed. I mumbled, "Thanks, Sigrid," and tumbled out of bed. Although Sigrid was dedicated to keeping the world informed about Nazi Germany, she could publish only a fraction of what she knew, and there were others outside Berlin who were also tracking the spread of fascism through Europe. When Martha Gellhorn went to Madrid in March 1937, it was with the conviction that the Civil War...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?